My child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has reached you at an hour when your heart may not have been expecting it, and what you are about to hear carries the weight of a conversation that almost never happened. Pause here, just for these next few moments, because in this fictional message of divine love, there is a name being spoken in a quiet hospital room, and that name is yours. Not because someone was asked to remember you. Not because a friend casually brought you into the conversation. Your soulmate asked for you on their own. In the middle of uncertainty, surrounded by unfamiliar walls, soft footsteps in the hallway, and the strange stillness that comes when life suddenly forces everything else to become unimportant, they said something that changed the atmosphere in that room. They did not ask first about tomorrow. They did not ask about the person everyone expected them to call. They asked, "Can you find them for me?" And when someone quietly asked who they meant, your soulmate said your name. You need to understand why that matters, because the deepest part of this story is not the hospital itself. It is what became impossible for your soulmate to hide once everything around them grew quiet. There are moments in life when people can distract themselves from what they feel. They fill their days with work, conversations, pride, routines, other people's opinions, and all the convenient excuses that keep the heart from speaking too loudly. Your soulmate had become very skilled at doing exactly that. They had convinced themselves that distance was manageable. They told themselves there would always be another day to explain. Another opportunity to say what they should have said before. Another chance to admit why your absence affected them more deeply than they ever allowed you to see. But something happened that interrupted that illusion. Suddenly, tomorrow did not feel like an endless promise. Suddenly, all the unfinished conversations began returning to them at once. And of everything they could have thought about in that vulnerable hour, their mind kept returning to you. The extraordinary part is that they tried not to say your name at first. They stared toward the doorway as if expecting someone who had not yet arrived. A person beside them noticed and asked whether they needed anything. Your soulmate said no. A few minutes later, they asked what time it was. Then they became quiet again. But beneath that silence, something was happening that no one in the room understood. Memories were beginning to move through them in fragments. A moment when you looked at them differently than anyone else ever had. A conversation they pretended not to remember but had replayed many times when alone. The sound of your voice when you were trying not to show that something had hurt you. The way you once gave them kindness when they had done very little to deserve it. These were not dramatic memories. That was exactly why they were so powerful. They were ordinary moments that had become sacred in hindsight because your soulmate suddenly understood that the things they had taken for granted were the very things they feared losing. And then there was one memory that caused them to close their eyes. Nobody around them knew what they were seeing inwardly, but heaven in this story sees what human eyes cannot. They remembered a time when you were waiting for honesty from them. You had not demanded perfection. You had not asked them to become someone else. You had only wanted truth. Yet they hesitated. There was something they should have admitted, something simple but emotionally enormous, that your presence had changed them. They were afraid of what would happen if they said it aloud. They feared that once they acknowledged how deeply they cared, they would no longer be able to pretend they were unaffected. So instead of moving closer, they protected themselves. Perhaps they became distant. Perhaps they allowed confusion to stand where clarity should have been. Perhaps they acted as though losing you would be easier than admitting how much you mattered. But in that hospital room, the defenses that once felt necessary began to look painfully small. This is where the story turns, because your soulmate did not only think about you. They began asking questions. Quiet questions. Questions that startled the person sitting nearby. They asked whether anyone had contacted you. The answer was no. They asked whether someone still had your number. There was hesitation. Then someone said, "Why? Do you want them to know you're here?" Your soulmate looked away for several seconds. That pause carried years of emotion inside it. Pride told them to say no. Fear told them that reaching for you now might look desperate. The old version of them would have laughed it off, changed the subject, or said they were only curious. But something inside had shifted. They turned back and whispered, "I don't care how it looks anymore." Those words were the beginning of something. Because when a person stops caring how love looks and starts caring whether love is true, everything changes. Your soulmate had spent too much time calculating. Should I message? Should I wait? What will they think? What if they reject me? What if I reveal too much? What if someone else sees me trying? What if I lose control of the situation? But there are moments when the heart becomes exhausted by strategy. That hour became one of those moments. Your soulmate realized that they had treated love like something that could be postponed until circumstances were perfect. Yet life had just reminded them that perfection was never promised. And suddenly the possibility of never telling you the truth felt heavier than the possibility of being rejected. My child, there is another layer you have not yet seen. Someone in that room already knew about you. Not everything, but enough. This person had heard your soulmate mention you before, though never with the vulnerability they were witnessing now. Your name had surfaced indirectly in conversations. Sometimes as a memory. Sometimes as a complaint that was clearly hiding affection. Sometimes when your soulmate compared someone else to you without realizing it. This person had noticed the pattern long before your soulmate admitted anything. Every time your name appeared, their expression changed slightly. Their voice softened. Or they became strangely defensive. That is often how hidden attachment reveals itself, not through grand declarations, but through the tiny changes people cannot control. So when your soulmate asked for you, this person did not look surprised. They looked relieved. And that reaction confused your soulmate. "What?" they asked. The person beside them answered carefully, "I wondered how long it would take you to say their name." Imagine the silence after those words. Your soulmate stared at them, almost irritated, because being seen that clearly can feel uncomfortable when you have spent months trying to hide from yourself. They asked what that was supposed to mean. The answer came gently but directly, "You've been talking about them without talking about them for a long time." Your soulmate tried to deny it. But the denial did not survive more than a few seconds. They looked toward the ceiling and let out a small breath, the kind someone gives when they realize the argument they were preparing no longer matters. Then they asked something even more revealing. "Do you think they would come?" That question did not come from confidence. It came from fear. For the first time, your soulmate was forced to consider that you might not come simply because they called. You may have been hurt too deeply. You may have learned to protect your peace. You may have spent nights wondering why someone who supposedly cared could make you feel so uncertain. There may have been moments when you questioned whether the connection had ever meant to them what it meant to you. And now, sitting beneath sterile lights, your soulmate was finally confronting the consequence of all those unanswered questions. They were not wondering whether you loved them. They were wondering whether they had made themselves too difficult to love safely. That realization affected them more than anyone expected. Their eyes filled, but they turned their face away. They were not crying because of the hospital. They were crying because your absence had become visible. There is a difference. Pain can make people think about survival. But love makes people think about meaning. And in this fictional revelation, your soulmate was suddenly asking themselves what their life had become without the truth between you. They remembered all the occasions they could have spoken and chose silence. Every time they drafted words but never sent them. Every time they watched from a distance and convinced themselves it was enough. Every time they hoped you would somehow understand feelings they had refused to communicate. They began to realize something painfully simple. You were never asking them to be fearless. You were asking them to be honest. Then someone said, if they came through that door right now, what would you tell them? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That question reached somewhere no medical examination ever could. For several moments, they stared at their hands. Their fingers tightened together. Their breathing changed. And inside their mind, an entire conversation with you unfolded. At first they imagined saying something safe, "I'm glad you came." Then they rejected it. Too small. Too polite. Too much like all the half-truths they had hidden behind before. They thought about saying, "I missed you." Still incomplete. They had missed you, yes, but missing you was only the surface. Underneath it was regret. Underneath regret was fear. Underneath fear was a love they had tried to rename so many times that even they no longer believed the excuses. Finally they said aloud, "Would tell them I was wrong." The room became still. Wrong about what? That question hung there. Your soulmate swallowed and continued. Wrong to think I had more time. Wrong to think they would always understand without me explaining. Wrong to let other people's voices become louder than mine. Wrong to act like I didn't care when I cared too much. And then they stopped. Because the next sentence was more difficult. The person beside them waited. Your soulmate whispered, and I would tell them why. That why is important, my child, because it connects to something you never fully knew. There was a reason your soulmate created distance, and it was not as simple as losing interest. The truth is more complicated and, in some ways, more painful. They had been afraid of becoming emotionally dependent on the one person who made them feel understood without performance. They had spent much of their life learning how to remain in control. Maybe they were used to being the strong one. Maybe vulnerability had once cost them something. Maybe previous relationships taught them that attachment could become a weapon in someone else's hands. So when they began to feel safe with you, instead of embracing it, they became frightened by how much power that safety seemed to have. You represented something they wanted deeply but did not know how to hold. And people sometimes run from the very thing they pray for when it finally appears in a form that requires them to change. This does not excuse the confusion they caused. It does not erase the moments when you may have felt forgotten. But it explains why their behavior often seemed contradictory. Why they could move close and then disappear emotionally. Why they could show signs of caring and then act detached. Why they remembered tiny things about you while pretending nothing mattered. Why they sometimes seemed almost jealous of your happiness while insisting they had moved on. Their heart had chosen a direction before their courage was ready to follow. Yet something in that hospital room shattered the illusion that courage could wait forever. A nurse entered, checked a few things, spoke quietly, and left. Nothing dramatic happened. But after the door closed, your soulmate became more restless. They asked again whether anyone had tried to contact you. The person beside them said they had not because they did not want to interfere. Your soulmate answered more firmly this time, "Please do." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Then came the sentence no one expected. "Tell them I asked for them. Don't make it sound accidental. That detail matters." They did not want a vague message reaching you. They did not want you hearing, "Someone thought maybe you should know." They wanted you to know that they had chosen your name deliberately. That in a moment when pretenses were falling away, they had asked for you. But before anyone could send the message, your soulmate suddenly said, "Wait." And this is where another hidden layer began to emerge. They asked for their phone. Someone handed it to them. Your soulmate stared at the screen for a long time without unlocking it. Their thumb hovered over it, then dropped. They looked nervous in a way no one had seen before. Finally they opened something. Something that had been sitting there unseen by everyone else. A message thread. "Yours." They scrolled slowly. And as they did, their expression changed. There were old conversations. Some warm. Some confusing. Some carrying sentences that seemed ordinary when first written but now felt like pieces of a life they had mishandled. They paused over one particular message from you. Perhaps you had written something kind. Perhaps you had told them to take care of them. But the hospital changed that perspective. Suddenly they did not want armor. They wanted the person who had seen beneath it. Then came the confession that shifted everything again. Your soulmate admitted there had been a night, not long ago, when they almost contacted you. They had opened your conversation and typed a long message. Not a casual greeting. Not a simple, "How are you?" It was the closest thing to the truth they had ever written. They had explained why they disappeared emotionally. Why they seemed conflicted. Why they listened too much to people who did not understand the connection. Why they had been trying to convince themselves they could simply move forward without addressing what remained unfinished between you. The message was long. But they never sent it. They deleted it. And now they wished they had not. The person beside them asked, "What did it say?" Your soulmate gave a sad smile and answered, "Everything. Everything." That single word carried more emotion than pages could hold. But here is where the mystery deepens, because your soulmate remembered enough of that deleted message to repeat part of it aloud. They said they had written, "I don't know whether I deserve another chance to speak to you, but I know I can't keep pretending that losing you felt normal." Then their voice broke slightly. They looked toward the door again. And suddenly, the hospital room was no longer just a place of uncertainty. It had become the setting of a decision. Your soulmate said, "If they come, I'm telling them." The person beside them asked, "Telling them what?" Your soulmate answered, "The thing I should have told them before anyone else got involved." Now listen closely, because those final words reveal that your story has another person standing somewhere in the background. Someone whose influence had affected your soulmate more than you realized. It may not have been a romantic rival. It may have been a family member, a friend, an ex, or someone whose opinion carried weight at the wrong time. This person had said something about you. Something that planted doubt. Something your soulmate later discovered was incomplete, distorted, or spoken from a place of personal bias. And your soulmate had believed enough of it to hesitate. Not forever, but long enough to hurt the connection. The painful truth is that they never told you. Instead of coming to you and asking what was real, they carried the doubt silently. They watched your behavior through the lens of someone else's words. Innocent moments began looking suspicious. Silence became misinterpreted. Distance created more distance. And because neither of you fully knew what the other was carrying, confusion grew where honesty should have lived. But recently, something exposed the weakness in that old story. Your soulmate discovered evidence that the person who influenced them had not been completely truthful. This discovery had already been weighing on them before the hospital. Now, lying there with nowhere to run from their own thoughts, they realized that the damage caused by that misinformation could no longer be ignored. They reached again for their phone. This time, they did not open your messages. They opened another conversation. The person beside them could not see the screen, but they saw your soulmate's face become tense. There were messages there from the very individual who had once advised them to step away from you. And one recent message revealed something your soulmate had not expected. Someone had admitted more than they intended to admit. A sentence. A small contradiction. A careless detail. Enough to make your soulmate go back and reread older conversations. And suddenly the truth began rearranging itself. They had not lost you because love disappeared. They had nearly lost you because fear, pride, and someone else's interference were allowed to speak louder than direct conversation. Your soulmate looked at the screen and said quietly, "I should have asked them." The person beside them knew exactly who "them" meant. You. "I should have asked them instead of believing this." Then they did something bold. They began typing. At first, it seemed they were preparing to message you. But no. They were writing to the person whose words had caused so much doubt. The message was short. "I know now." They stared at those 3 words. Then sent them. Almost immediately, the phone vibrated. A reply. Your soulmate read it. Their expression changed from sadness to disbelief. Another reply came. Then another. The person on the other side seemed nervous now, trying to explain, trying to reshape what had happened, trying to insist there had been a misunderstanding. Your soulmate did not argue. They simply read. Because once someone sees the pattern clearly, explanations that once sounded convincing can suddenly sound very different. Then the final message arrived. And whatever it contained made your soulmate sit more upright despite being told to rest. The person beside them asked, "What happened?" Your soulmate did not respond. Their eyes remained fixed on the screen. For several seconds, they looked stunned. Then they whispered your name again. But this time, there was something different in their voice. Not longing. Not regret. Urgency. They turned to the person beside them and said, "We need to reach them before they hear this from anyone else." Before they hear what? That is the question heaven places before this story now. Because apparently, the person who had interfered knew something else. Something connected to you, to your soulmate, and to a conversation that occurred after the distance began. Your soulmate had just learned that their hesitation had been encouraged intentionally. Not necessarily because someone hated you, but because someone feared what would happen if the two of you became close again. They feared losing influence. They feared being exposed. Or perhaps they feared that once your soulmate chose according to their own heart, an old arrangement would collapse. And suddenly, your soulmate understood why certain things had happened in such perfect sequence. Why every time they considered reaching out, someone appeared with a new reason not to. Why every piece of information about you seemed to arrive secondhand. Why they had been told you were moving on before they had ever asked you directly. Why they had been encouraged to leave it alone. Your soulmate looked deeply shaken, not because they had discovered some frightening secret, but because they realized how easily a precious connection can be distorted when two people stop speaking directly. And now they wanted to correct it. Immediately. They asked again for you. This time, no hesitation. Please find them. Someone began preparing to make the call. But before the number was dialed, another person entered the room. And the moment your soulmate saw who it was, everything changed. Their expression hardened. The person who entered stopped in the doorway. For a second, nobody spoke. Because the person standing there was connected to the very secret your soulmate had just uncovered. They had not expected to see this person today. And judging by the visitor's face, the visitor had not expected your soulmate to know the truth. Your soulmate slowly placed the phone on the bed beside them. The message thread was still open. The evidence was still visible. The visitor glanced at it and immediately understood. "What did they tell you?" the visitor asked. Your soulmate answered with a question. "Why did you keep me away from them?" The room fell silent. The visitor tried to smile, but it disappeared almost instantly. They said, "This isn't the place." Your soulmate replied, "Then where was the place?" "Because you made sure I never had one." The emotional intensity changed. Not into anger, but into clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after months of confusion and suddenly makes every forgotten detail important again. The visitor looked toward the person beside the bed, clearly uncomfortable having a witness present. Then they said something none of them expected. "I was trying to protect you." Protect them from what? Your soulmate asked exactly that. The visitor hesitated. Then said, from what would happen if you found out why they really disappeared. Your soulmate froze. Because according to everything they knew, you had not simply disappeared. You had pulled back after being hurt. So what did this person mean by, why they really disappeared? The visitor realized too late that they had revealed more than intended. Your soulmate leaned forward and repeated, what do you mean? No answer. Tell me. The visitor looked toward the door. Your soulmate's voice became quieter. Does this have something to do with the message they never received? That sentence changed everything. Because there had been a message. A message from your soulmate to you. One they believed had reached you months ago. But according to what they had just discovered, it may never have reached you at all. The visitor's face gave away the truth before their mouth did. Your soulmate went completely still. Then they asked, you knew? The visitor whispered, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. That is when the deepest wound surfaced. Your soulmate had spent months believing you saw their message and chose not to respond. And perhaps you had spent those same months believing they never reached out. Two people waiting on opposite sides of a silence neither of them fully created. My child, imagine what that realization did to them. Every assumption. Every night of wondering. Every time they told themselves your silence was an answer. It all began collapsing. Your soulmate looked down, covered their face with one hand, and whispered, they never knew. The visitor tried to explain. Your soulmate did not listen. They picked up the phone. Call them now. The person beside them immediately began dialing. One ring. Then another. Your soulmate stared at the phone as though the entire future were hidden inside those seconds. Another ring. Still no answer. The visitor stood frozen near the doorway. Then, just as the call seemed about to end, something happened. The person holding the phone looked at your soulmate. Their expression changed. Someone had answered. But before they could speak your name, a voice on the other end said something so unexpected that your soulmate's face lost all color. They whispered, what did you just say? And that, my beloved child, is where the truth you have been waiting for begins to open.